Stellantis just posted a $2.7 billion loss, or what Chrysler likes to call a promising start. Because the boldest act of corporate synergy in the world is having 14 brands under one umbrella that are all struggling in the same way. Oh cool, you want to be like Netflix and have projects that take so long to come out that nobody cares anymore. Or cancel things that don't become immediate cultural juggernauts. Or how about raising prices to compensate for content that's less popular and worse received? Look, we're about a year removed from my report on Stellantis facing major hurdles, and in that time, it really hasn't gotten any better. Profits have tumbled by 70%. The share price was cut in half, and CEO Carlos Tavares abruptly quit the company because the tan wasn't worth the heat. And while I don't think anybody really expected things to change immediately under a new CEO, I do think the company thought they would have time to put a decent plan together to right the ship. But then tariffs happened. Mismanagement continued. Sales remained mostly dire. And now the company is on track to lose almost $3 billion in the first half of 2025. I would call this entire situation a dumpster fire, but that would imply anybody cares enough to throw a match in the first place. So what's going on at Stellantis? What are the people in charge even doing to turn this around? Does Stellantis deserve to survive? The nightmare continues for one of America's big three automakers.
Roman report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars.
On July 21st, Stellantis revealed their projections for the first 6 months of 2025, and they're not good. The total projected loss for the first half of the year comes to 2.3 billion euros, or $2.7 billion, with 300 million euros of that loss coming from having to pay tariffs, as well as planned production losses due to the company's scaling back production in anticipation of tariff-related costs, only to then end up incurring higher costs per unit because the factories are operating below capacity. Yet, while this production downsizing has led to a 25% decline in cars delivered to domestic buyers, it wasn't the only reason for the rough year Stellantis is having, as Congress passed a bill that eliminated requirements for clean air standards, which meant that all of those clean air credits that Stellantis bought to compensate for potentially excessive pollution have just become as useful as a Dave & Buster's card at a casino. But the company remains optimistic in their earnings report, stating that they are in, quote, the early stage of actions being taken to improve performance and profitability, with new products expected to deliver larger benefits in the second half of 2025, end quote. And to their credit, it does seem like Stellantis has cause for hope. I would think that the aforementioned decision to scale back production could potentially reduce costs in the short term, provided that factories don't continue operating under capacity long term. And while the cultural shift towards full electrification has slowed down a bit, Stellantis is making inroads with vehicles like the Jeep Wagoneer S and the upcoming Jeep Recon. The company is even throwing a bone to performance enthusiasts with the resurrection of the SRT brand, so buyers can enjoy the thrill of losing a 10mm bolt in the engine bay when they pop the hood to see how they can improve upon American engineering. Of course, there's every possibility this division ends up existing as a way to make people believe in electric muscle cars, you know? Sort of build out the product line from the Charger Daytona and go from there. And that's fine, honestly, if that's your strategy. But this ain't Peter Pan, and clapping alone isn't going to bring Tinkerbell back to life. This begins and ends with building cars people actually want to buy, not just cars they want to drive. And while those two things sound like they go hand in hand, you see a car you want to drive and then you just buy it, truly talking people into the driver's seat is not the same thing as talking them into the finance office, because you have to give them something they don't just want to experience, but something they can justify dropping the money on. I know, common sense, but you'd be surprised. Maybe that's what this revived SRT lineup will do for Stellantis. At the very least, it comes across as triage for their public perception. Give the people something to be excited about while we figure out what we can give them to be excited about. Or maybe let's find a way to distract from the absolute thrashing we're taking. As Reuters reports, the $2.7 billion loss is a lot bigger than Wall Street was anticipating, since consumer dissatisfaction is outweighed only by upset dealers justifying taking the company to task over their product strategy, or lack thereof. Factory shutdowns related to the tariffs have led to inventory shortages, and the inventory that actually does manage to hit the market has been subject to various problems to where dealers are basically left holding the bag over cars that break, expending their own resources to perform recall services. For instance, in January, roughly 300,000 Ram heavy-duty pickup trucks were recalled due to a defective part that could severely impact the braking and tracking systems. Then, in April, they recalled over 40,000 Dodge Hornets and 8,000 Alfa Romeo Tonales over the display module failing to show a rear-view image while reversing. In June, Stellantis recalled a bunch of 2022 to 2025 Chrysler Pacificas and Voyagers totaling some 250,000 cars due to the side curtain airbag being improperly sealed. Then, just this month, they recalled 121,000 Jeep Grand Cherokee and Jeep Grand Cherokee L's over head restraints in the second row seats that fail to lock in the upright position. And look, in isolation, you could maybe argue that these aren't the biggest issues in the world, at least as far as recall necessitating failures go. After all, every brand has recalls, every year, and it's better to catch these things before the portals open up like Avengers Endgame and a bunch of high-priced lawyers step out ready to assemble in the name of 8-figure settlements. If nothing else, it's good that these things are discovered before somebody gets hurt, right? Yet again, the problem here is one of public perception, because Stellantis is already seen as a low-value brand by a lot of consumers, and the company absolutely cannot afford to have their brand perceived as low-value and unreliable. But when it comes to the inventory, I do think they have some interesting stuff in the pipeline, but I'm not sure to what extent people are really excited about it, although I admit that's entirely anecdotal on my part, since I read a lot of automotive news, but I don't see any Jeep Recon hype in my feed. But then I'm not really the target audience. With that said, while the Jeep Wagoneer S looks nice, it's facing stiff competition from known entities in the EV sector, since, well, Stellantis has been kind of late to the EV party. But that's why I think it's a safer bet to focus on the Wrangler 4xe and the Grand Cherokee 4xe, if for no other reason than because they're hybrids and they seem to be selling well. And in general, hybrids are the new hotness. Case in point, hybrids are actually outselling EVs right now. Last year saw hybrids sell over 300,000 more units than EVs, and that number is on track to be surpassed in 2025. But even ignoring the rise in hybrid sales, it seems like people aren't entirely opposed to fully electric vehicles outright, and that's encouraging. A report by Pew Research Center just last month showed that 1/3 of Americans would seriously consider purchasing an electric vehicle as their next car, which is an increase over last year, albeit down from the 42% high of 2022. But I provide this context in order to show how dicey a situation this is for Stellantis, because it's not necessarily as simple as making more EVs or making more hybrids, because the kind of resources that go into making them would preclude Stellantis from pricing them competitively right now. Yeah, the market suggests that Stellantis would be able to justify a high MSRP, but looking at it big picture, people don't really think about Dodge or Chrysler or Jeep or Fiat when they think about EVs. And that's a significant hurdle to overcome, especially when you're also trying to serve the performance enthusiasts and the economy buyers. So how did Stellantis end up in this position? Well, Carlos Tavares is the scapegoat, but I think I might have been more than a little unfair to him in my previous report. You see, Carlos Tavares' management style focused on cutting costs, which made him the right man for the job when he became CEO in January 2021. He had pulled off a Lee Iacocca-style rescue job on Group PSA in 2014, taking a failing company and carrying them to profitability through cost reduction methods rather than investing money and resources in expansion. Like, we're not just going to throw good money after bad here. We're going to budget and we're going to fix our numbers. Because to fix a house, you gotta clean it first. Now, CEOs generally seem to operate from two thought paths. Either you cut that budget to the bone and find savings anywhere you can, like a Midwestern housewife who stacks coupons higher than Dirk Nowitzki's nutsack, or you have that mentality that you have to spend money to make money, so you increase ad spend and R&D and you just pray that the money comes back to you. Because no matter whom or what you're praying to, business is a faith-based enterprise. And you have to believe in something, even if that something is yourself, even if it's your colleagues, your workers. Like Parappa the Rapper said, you gotta believe. And these opposing strategies aren't really sustainable long term. They're just good at facilitating change, depending on the situation. Tavares proved he could save a company from bankruptcy because he did it for PSA in just 3 years. And this was exactly the sort of leader Stellantis needed after what 2020 did to the automotive industry, coupled with the global chip shortage, inflation, and rising interest rates. Tavares got in there and spread those operating margins wider than a stanced Aventador. Operating income and profits would rise year over year in his first 2 years as CEO, with the company recording $17.9 billion in profit for 2022. It was an incredible turnaround for the company. But to borrow another TV analogy, Tavares was like the showrunners for Game of Thrones, because those guys signed on to adapt the books, not finish them for an author who couldn't solve the limitations of his own narrative. And in the same way, Tavares was brought on to steady the ship and get the company back into fighting shape. He doesn't come across to me like he was the guy for carving out a new path forward and reinventing the brand strategy. And this is why it all led to Tavares butting heads with the board of directors, because the board wanted reinvention. They wanted that approach, whereas Tavares wanted to take a more restrained path that focused on maximizing revenue through cost cutting. And to be fair, both sides had their point, because you can keep a company running for a really long time just doing triage and pumping out low-cost, high-volume cars that don't push any boundaries, rock any boats, or win any hearts or minds. But I don't think you can really grow like that. And honestly, the constantly shifting conditions of the auto industry might make that functionally impossible, with things like the aforementioned tariffs and legislative penalties making traditional forms of car production completely unsustainable at low costs. So I get where Tavares was coming from by playing it safe. When you're bleeding out, you're not thinking about what you're having for dinner next week. I can understand how hopeless the situation had to feel at Stellantis, to where it's easier to just focus on getting to the next day, rather than looking ahead to the future, because the stress of approaching a long-term plan can make the present feel pointless. All it's going to do is remind us of how far we have to go, and make it more clear how far we've fallen. It's just, I can understand how it makes everything feel too daunting for hope. But hope springs eternal. So, what can Stellantis do? Well, the company named a new CEO in May in the form of 51-year-old Antonio Filosa, Stellantis' former chief operating officer of the Americas. And he remains optimistic on the company's outlook, with global consolidated shipments expected to reach around 1.4 million units in the second half of 2025. And while that would be down 6% year over year, it shows a company in transition ready to make the necessary changes for growth, settling in for a protracted battle back into the hearts of consumers. But I think the key things they need to do right now center on how they make their cars. For one, I don't think they can really afford to cancel any more projects. Or I should clarify that they don't have the resources to invest in projects that they aren't going to see through to completion, because they don't have the money to be in their side quest era. For example, they recently discontinued their hydrogen fuel cell technology development program because, quote, the hydrogen market is showing no development prospect at midterm, end quote. But isn't that the sort of thing that's apparent before you start? Or at least at an earlier point than now? Or is it really a case of there appearing to be a market for hydrogen fuel cell technology that then simply never materialized? I'm genuinely asking here because I could be hilariously wrong about this, and if I am, I want to know. But beyond that, they've also canceled plans for an electric Maserati MC20 due to low demand. Meanwhile, the long-planned Chrysler EV crossover has been delayed indefinitely, and the Ram 1500 REV has had the standard range model pushed to 2027, while the 500-mile long-range variant has been canceled altogether. That's gotta add up to a lot of wasted money and R&D resources for projects that just haven't panned out. And you'd think all the market research would have been done prior to announcing these vehicles. But in Stellantis' defense, I'm not exactly in the know on all the complexities of automotive development processes. And yet it still feels like this isn't the sort of thing that should be happening in a company looking to turn things around, right? Even when accounting for the unexpected legislative bombs that have been peppered throughout, like an Appalachian trail of acne across a teenage face. And on the subject of production, another thing that Stellantis can do is localize more of that production. Yeah, it might suck to have to operate in a post-tariff environment, but that's the world we're stuck with for now. So Stellantis can't really afford not to work within that system by having more cars built in the United States. But again, the problem here is that a lot of the parts are made elsewhere. And as I've noted before, a completely 100% American-made car doesn't really exist. And while it's easy to say, just build more cars here, you know, it's not really practical. Maybe if automakers had been given a heads up of several years, they could have had the time to implement a better plan. But even if they had been told in, 2019, 2020 was right around the corner. The world was about to shut down. The auto industry was about to be thrown into chaos. And sure, they're thrown into chaos now, but I don't know how to finish that sentence. This is to say nothing of various union strikes related to how bad Stellantis tends to be at labor relations, to the point where the United Auto Workers Union is straight up asking for more work because they have factories that are being underutilized. Out of the 18 Stellantis plants currently operating in the United States, most are operating under capacity due to decreased shipments and the production downsizing. But the problem for the UAW right now is that Stellantis isn't exactly focused on increasing their volume, not in the current economic climate. And even if they were to do so, they're focused on increasing development in the EV space, which not every factory is outfitted to accommodate. Stellantis has already planned to invest roughly $5 billion into US manufacturing, but from what I've read, this seems to mostly be tied to the company's Dare Forward 2030 plan for electrification of their lineup. A lot of that money is going towards projects like developing an EV battery plant and parts distributor next to the Belvidere assembly plant in Illinois, or building another battery factory in Indiana, or upgrading the Sterling Heights assembly, Warren truck assembly, and Dundee engine plants in Michigan for EV manufacturing. This is smart, but it's also going to take time. And there's an argument to be made that Stellantis is leaving money on the table by not utilizing their full factory capacity to boost inventory of internal combustion models, as this could help improve dealer relations, provided you're not just shoving product out there to be immediately recalled. And honestly, improving dealer relationships is something they should be working on anyway, since this is part of what got Carlos Tavares in such hot water. They felt like he didn't have a plan and was trying to maintain short-term profits at the expense of a larger vision. Of course, the larger vision appears to be that Dare Forward 2030 plan, which aims to have about 75 battery electric vehicle models with a goal of 100% BEV sales in Europe and 50% in the US from a mixture of passenger cars and light-duty trucks. By 2030, they need to make sure that their models are not just ready to go, but ready to wage war. That means competitive pricing, because you can't manufacture a bunch of EVs, price them at $65,000, and expect people are going to flock to you in droves. You can have your nice options and your really ambitious options. But I think the foundation that supports ambition is accessibility. The only way to be competitive in the space is to show that you're not the old Stellantis. You know what you're doing now. You didn't before, but you were committed to learning and growing, and now you're here with something appealing, accessible, and affordable. The 3 A's. No, not those 3 A's. Of course, I am perfectly aware that I am armchair quarterbacking here, and that this is all easier said than done. That it requires long-term planning, which seems to have been the bane of Stellantis' existence for a long time, and it'll require patience, which I guess goes hand in hand with the long-term planning, and it'll require vision, which, okay, these are all just aspects of the same long-term planning idea. Recovery takes time. If it didn't, hangovers wouldn't be a thing. But I think Stellantis can recover. And I do think they deserve to, if for no other reason than so that people don't lose their jobs. I'm really sensitive to that, because I just think mismanagement shouldn't result in a bunch of people in a factory not being able to make ends meet. Ultimately, I don't think it's hopeless for Stellantis, not by any stretch, but it'll require the brand rebuilding relationships with dealers, with unions, with consumers. You gotta have patience in order to rebuild trust and reestablish that this is a brand worth paying attention to, with offerings for every consumer at every level, good offerings, cars that can satisfy the person who views them as nothing more than appliances, and thrill the people who view cars as the lifeblood of a purposeful existence. If I learned anything from the time Lee Iacocca saved Chrysler, it's that this brand is always going to have its peaks and valleys, and probably a lot more valleys than peaks. But the right leadership paired with a strong vision can turn it all around. Well, that and a substantial government bailout. But what do you think? Is it hopeless for Stellantis, or can they turn it around? Are there any cars Stellantis could make that would get you interested in giving them your money? What do you think Stellantis can do to fix all of this? Let's talk it out in the comments. My screen name is Limited Time Roman, so be on the lookout. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, or even share it to keep the conversation going. And to support us in the biggest way possible, join our Patreon, because we wouldn't be able to keep making stuff like this without your support. For merch, check out Zazzle for bumper stickers and keychains, and Fourth Wall for our exclusive shirt collection. Every Fourth Wall order gets a personalized thank you video from yours truly, if that adds any value to you. And if not, too bad, you're getting thanked anyway. In fact, you're getting thanked right now. Thank you again for watching, and have an outstanding rest of your week. Take care. Stellantis is in trouble. What are we gonna do? Get another bailout from the government? I don't know what else to say. I'm doing this off dome. I wanna go home. Bleh.